To be white, you have to delete historical context. Nathan, Hitler did, Medicaid for all. He did all these amazing social welfare programs. Did he? All right, guys, what's up? I'm Nathan from the podcast Critical Race Jewelry. So, full transparency, I'm doing a reaction video. It's kind of a reaction video. Thing is that I watched it already. So, Kara, my producer, sent it to me. I watched it. I'm gonna be honest with you, I'm not proud of this at all. I got a little triggered by this video, and so I was just not coming from a good place. So I'm about to watch it again because I know there's quality stuff that I can talk about. Jorden Peterson is honestly an interesting guy. He has an interesting take, and so we're gonna go through it. I'm gonna tell you about it, and then we'll sum up what's going on. So, let's go.
So, one of the things Hitler started, it's a very strange story in many ways because Hitler was obsessed with order and cleanliness. He was a very orderly person. And he was very sensitive to disgust, because you think, well, the Nazis were afraid of the Jews.
Okay, so let's talk about this. Was Hitler very sensitive to disgust? Was he obsessed with order and cleanliness? So, in terms of disgust, murdering millions of people is disgusting. The way that millions of people were murdered is disgusting, particularly when it comes to murdering minorities. So, are you sensitive to disgust if you're willing to let your soldiers bash a baby's head in instead of using a bullet because you don't want to waste ammo? You know what I mean? Like, that to me is disgust. So, this is the thing about Jorden Peterson is he's always kind of half right because he understands what happened, but his perspective is it's almost like unapologetically white, to be honest with you. His perspective, we talk about people being unapologetically black, unapologetically Jewish, unapologetically whatever they are. Jorden Peterson, low-key, is unapologetically white. And that's a little bit of issue for me, because for me, whiteness means you fully accepted that you've given up where you come from. You no longer care about where you come from, you care about where you are right now. That's that way. So you lose so much heritage, context, cultural understanding. All of these things are lost when you start to just fully accept this concept of whiteness. So Jorden Peterson is half correct. The half he's missing is the half of everyone else's perspective. I would never say that Hitler was sensitive to disgust. I would say Hitler was extremely insecure. I believe that every time he farted, he would freak out. I also believe that he was like, I heard that he had a micro penis. Which might not be true. In the first video I said that might have been something someone came up with because everyone hated Hitler. But truth be told, until Hitler loses the war, a lot of people are, Germany, there's widespread support for Hitler. Across Europe, in many ways, there's a widespread support for Hitler's racial ideologies. They don't like the idea that he seems warlike, but they really can connect. We call that racial collaboration in Jewish studies. You don't collaborate ideologically, you don't agree with his fascism, but you do agree with his racism, which is a little bit confusing because racism is often present with fascism. So it's like you kind of do agree a little bit with his fascism, but I don't want to get into it. It takes too much time to hold all of Europe accountable. So let me just keep watching. But this is Jorden Peterson, ladies and gentlemen.
Because they were other, and that's not right. What's more accurate is that especially Hitler, he was very sensitive to disgust.
Once again, was he very sensitive to disgust? In order to save bullets, they would break children's backs and then throw them in the pit with the other dead bodies, and then fill the pit in with earth. So much so that there would be these fountains of blood created from the pressure of the earth pushing down on these bodies. Sorry if this is really gross. This stuff fascinates me because I just am amazed at the lengths people will go to torture Jewish people. I just don't really think that Hitler was that sensitive to disgust.
That's what it looks like. And if you're disgusted by something, then you want to eradicate it, right? If you're afraid of something, you want to run away from it. If you're disgusted by it, you want to burn it to the damn ground.
See, this is another thing, because he says Hitler wanted to burn Jews to the ground, but Hitler's first method was to try and make life so terrible for Jews that they would leave on their own accord. That his first idea, his first design was not to exterminate all Jewish people. You see that happen further and further throughout the war. What I think happens is that while Hitler is murdering these Jews, while Hitler is robbing these Jews, he realizes that they don't have the insane amount of wealth that he thought they had. He was going to pay for his war against Europe, essentially with money stolen from Jews. He thought they had these huge hordes of wealth that he could just come in and take and then pay for his war. And as he finds out that that's not true, and that these myths of Jewish wealth aren't actually a real reality, he starts to get upset. And you see Hitler over the course of the war sort of lose his mind, because he starts to lose and realize how wrong he is. And while he's realizing how wrong he is, he starts to eliminate witnesses at a faster and faster rate. He starts to eliminate the Jews that he viciously robbed and persecuted. So this idea that Hitler started this whole thing because he was disgusted by Jews and wanted them to burn them to the ground, I mean, this is all just, I can understand to a certain degree because Jorden Peterson is filming live, but come on, man, you have a responsibility to this history. If you're going on live, I feel like you... But also, this host, by the way, this host is Jewish and just sits back. I mean, shout out to him just letting Jorden Peterson get his mind out so that I can then react to this video later. So that, I'm actually fully okay with it. But if I was in there, I'd be like, Jorden, the hell are you talking about, man? You're just saying whatever you want. And it's, once again, it's like, this is what white people believe. These are the things that you see in white people's histories of the Holocaust. You see these insane, sometimes just massive, they just try to rationalize these people by simplifying them. But the reality is they're complex like any other human being. It's not that he was just disgusted, but I digress. Let's keep watching.
You want to get rid of it. And his writings, like I read a book called Hitler's Table Talk, which was his spontaneous discussions during dinner time from 1939 to 1942. It's really another amazing book. And
who wrote this book? Who recorded all these conversations? I mean, you can't even find direct evidence that Hitler at all ever ordered the Holocaust. You know how hard it was to... The American persecutor in the Nuremberg trials, that was after World War II when they're persecuting Nazi war criminals. There were 3,000 identified war criminals that were responsible, I think, for like 3 million deaths. I mean, these were the people who were sent, these were the death squads, right? The death squad commanders. So, and some of these people are actually pulling the trigger. You know, Hitler never really pulls a trigger against a Jew. These are the guys really pulling the triggers. There's about 3,000 of them. He's only able to convict 22. I mean, the effort to hold people accountable after the Holocaust is a complete sham that has been totally rewritten because all these Nazis were let go and then returned to their positions in government and had insane influence and power and control over the historical narrative. I mean, you have even Nazis and Nazi collaborators who are then given the role. There's a guy, 𝗖𝗛𝗘𝗖𝗞, in the French government, who's a Nazi collaborator personally in charge of deporting Jews, who then gets put in charge after the war of writing the history of his French region, Vaucluse. And guess what? He leaves out all these Jews that he sent to their deaths. I mean, Jorden Peterson's history is the white history. And these books that are claiming what Hitler was talking about I just have a very hard time believing that this is the real stuff Hitler was saying. It really sounds awfully like it's just gonna be like a catalyst for propaganda, to be quite honest with you. So books like this that are claiming what Hitler said and just be very wary, because these men knew what they were doing was wrong, and they made it almost impossible to indict them because they knew what they were doing. So they didn't put their names on things all willy-nilly. Like, the real conversations that they were having, you're not going to see. So when you say you see a book of his dinner table conversations, I don't know, Jordan. I don't know if that's a completely valid source. If I'm going to use that source, which I would, because I appreciate scholarly literature, I also appreciate sources for what they are. But for what it is, I don't know if it's quite the source that you seem to be playing it up. It could easily just be propaganda or lies. I mean, so if you read that book, if you're interested in that book, sure, read it, but please read some Jewish historians or something too. I don't know. Sorry, that's a trap. Don't just read Jewish historians because they're Jewish. Don't do that. That's how you end up listening to even, not every Jewish historian has the perfect perspective just because they're Jewish. Anyway.
We had been doing some work and inspired a bit by Jonathan Haidt, who's done a lot of work on disgust and the relationship between trait personality. And I was reading this book at the same time, and it was just unbelievable how often Hitler referred to the people he was eradicating, the Slavs and the Gypsies and the Jews and all.
The Slavs and the Gypsies and the Jews. I'm fascinated by the way this guy orders. He puts Slavs. So there's this history, this behind-the-scenes history. So in Eastern Europe, where Slavs, that's Slavic people, in Eastern Europe, after the Holocaust, they have participated so much, at an everyday level, have participated so much in the destruction of the Jewish people, that there's an effort by the governments and by the propaganda ministers after the war, there's this effort to put Slavic pain and put Slavic persecution at the forefront. To diminish what happened to the Gypsies and the Jews, they talk about, it was the Slavs who received. But, it's really in the numbers. I mean, in Poland, I think 3 out of every 5 Polish people are murdered or something like that. I mean, it's insane. That's not good. I mean, also, Polish people in Hitler's racial hierarchy were supposed to just be workers, He was just going to send them to the mines. I mean, Hitler was a weird guy. But I think 3 out of 5 Polish people. And then for Jews, so let me say, 3 out of 5, that would be 6 out of 10? For Jews, it's 9 out of 10 Jews are murdered. So even, it's just in the numbers. It's interesting to see Slavs get placed first because it is so tied into that narrative of putting their persecution first, when really numerically, I really got to question how much they're targeted. You know what I mean? 6 out of 10 Slavs, or 6 out of 10 Polish citizens versus 9 out of 10 Polish Jews. Really, I mean, I don't want to get into comparing people's pain because there was a Gentile Polish person who lost they lost everything, and that's pain. I don't want to say that a Jewish person's pain is inherently worse. I'm just saying, looking at this trend, I think you're going to find often that there's just more Jews losing absolutely everything. So that's it. That's all I wanted to say, is that this putting Slavs first, I know that can seem just like, but this is actually genuinely a part of a trend of countries trying to diminish what they did to Jewish people by putting themselves first. And so I don't know if Jorden Peterson is fully aware of this. I don't know how much that even matters to him. I'm sure he's got several arguments up his sleeve for why this shouldn't matter to me. And the only reason why it doesn't fully matter to me is because I already know the background history, and that's why I'm giving it to you, so that you don't have to freak out about it, but just know that this could very well be tied. This doesn't seem like a coincidence to put Slavs first.
All the people he went after as parasites and as rats and as insects and all of that. So they were kind of put into that category. And here's a horrifying part of that story. Like when Hitler first came to power, he put in a lot of public health initiatives, including mass tuberculosis screening, which actually turned out to be a good thing. And at the same time,
I just don't. Well, here, actually, let me finish. He's going to finish this.
He went on a Beautify the Factories campaign. And so he convinced the German factory owners and so forth to increase the levels of hygiene in the factories, to get rid of the rats and the...
He convinced the German factory owners. So, first of all, he convinced the Gentile German factory owners. if there was a Jew that was still pro-Hitler at this point, I don't know when Hitler did this. I assume it was after 1933, after Hitler's rise to power in the government. But let's say that there was a Jewish factory owner who was so afraid of communism in Russia that they were willing to support Hitler because they saw Hitler as the bulwark. He was the shield against communism. So let's say that there was a Jewish, capitalist factory owner who was pro-Hitler. Not a lot of them. I'm going to be entirely honest with you. I mean, just really not a lot of them. And to not factor that in is something I see all the time. Growing up, I used to have always people telling me, Nathan, Hitler did, Medicaid for all. He did all these amazing social welfare programs. Did he? Because my ancestors didn't get that. So when you say he did all these things, all I hear is, I don't know anything about what happened to the Jews. That's what I personally hear I was going to say no offense to Jorden Peterson, but I don't think I should really care because he's so unapologetically white that I think he should understand someone who's also not apologetic. So, quite honestly, Jorden is falling into this trend of people who completely eliminate the Jewish perspective from history. And he's always going to be a little bit wrong because he does that, That's the thing about being unapologetically white. To be white, you have to delete historical context and your heritage and your history. That is the whole thing of whiteness. Come to America, Henry Ford, Americanization programs, all these little things designed to get you to leave your ethnicity and come to America and just be white and forget where you came from. And so, I don't know. I mean, he's clearly forgot. He never knew where Jewish people's perspective. He's either forgot Jewish people's perspective or he never knew it. My best guess is, like most people, he just never knew it. But I hate this argument. I hate this argument about Hitler coming around doing all these great things. For who? For who, really? For white people.
I used to plant flowers out front, to make everything look neat and orderly. And the insecticide they used was Zyklon. Well, Zyklon, to eradicate the rats and the insects, Zyklon, a slightly different formulation, was the gas that was used in the concentration camps. And so Hitler went from cleaning up the rats and the mice in the factories and the insects, and then he went into the mental hospitals and started cleaning up in there, and then, it just went...
Okay. I think Hitler did use euthanasia in mental hospitals, but this is another thing I hear a lot. Listen, as soon as Hitler comes to power, he's targeting Jews. The way that the history is written is that he starts targeting communist leaders and anti-fascist leaders, socialist leaders. He's targeting them, sure, but he's targeting Jews. People like to say that he targeted other people first. I just want to be very clear that that's not true. I mean, while he's in these mental hospitals, he's also targeting Jewish people. So, also, those Jewish people were dying in very violent ways. In some ways, these mental hospital patients, I mean, I'd rather be gassed than have to stand in a line and wait to be shot. I don't know. That's just me. I mean, they say that even I was watching this thing about the Rwanda genocide, and this woman was like, yeah, I mean, we would just stand there, and there was nothing you could do. You just stand there and you wait and then there was a distraction, so she got away. But I would just hate to be in that line waiting to die because that's just I just gas me, man. Plus, it's doesn't hurt as much, I'd assume. I'd hope. But I think the way they were doing it in the mental hospitals was it was like injection. It wasn't like they were putting them in showers like with the Jews. So anyway, that's a little bit about this. This is similar to that point he was making about where he said Slavs first. It's all about placing other people's pain before the Jewish people when it comes to analyzing this period of history.
Broader and broader, again, sort of one step at a time. And the Germans had plenty of reason to be resentful and hateful because, I mean, think about what they went through. We can't even imagine it. First of all, there was World War I, and so there was many men, like Hitler himself, who served in the trenches. And there's one story about Hitler. He won a medal for heroism in World War I, and he was sitting around with a group of his buddies and went off to do something, God only knows what. And when he came back, they were all dead because a mine had, not a mine, I don't remember, some kind of shell had landed in the middle of them and killed them all. It's like, that changes you.
Yeah.
You know, and then afterwards there was all these brutalized men who'd come out of the trenches. I mean, you just can't imagine what it must have been like in the...
Something, I don't know why, I just feel the need to say, World War I for a lot of people was, for a lot of Jews, was the first war they were allowed to fight in the ranks of their militaries, of their national militaries. My family was very loyal to Czechoslovakia. My granddad stayed attached to that country. My great-grandfather fought in World War I. And even Hitler, he gives Jews who were World War I veterans more time to escape, I suppose. But also just, he exterminates them last. I understand that we're talking about his traumas. I just don't want his traumas to become an excuse. And Jorden Peterson isn't really doing enough, in my personal opinion, to keep people from hearing this and thinking, oh yeah, okay, that makes sense. I'm willing to excuse some of it. No, don't do that.
The trenches, you know, especially if you're there for like a couple of years, you aren't the same person. Get out of there, you're unemployed, your country's in ruins. Then the hyperinflation hits, and every single person in Germany who ever saved any money at all is flat, bloody broke. And then there's a communist revolution.
Something interesting I actually just learned. So there's this retired American colonel who writes a lot about the time period, and he talks about, I'll get it so that we can have the link on the screen on YouTube, but he talks about how there's this idea that the hyperinflation, that the Treaty of Versailles, which is the treaty signed after World War I, was designed to completely destroy the German government. And he actually makes the argument that, no, that's completely untrue. If you look at the history, and he does a really great job, but if you look at the history, they actually give German government a really easy time, and that's why France is so frustrated. Actually, there's this back and forth of how France and Britain should treat the Germans, because Britain is relatively pro-German. They see them as a shield against communism. And France is like, Germany's invaded us twice over the last 100 years. We don't want World War II. I don't want this to happen. So they're trying to enforce it a lot heavier, and Britain and these other countries are like, no, be nice to them. But the reality of the situation I just want to cover really quickly is there's this myth that Germany was forced into World War II because of the Treaty of Versailles. But if you look at the history, the hyperinflation is actually a symptom of the Weimar Republic, the Germans' government's failure to address the economic crises that were happening all over the world. And this seems to be a trend with Jorden Peterson, is he continues to bring up these half-truths that seem to build into this greater perspective that he has. And you'll see at the end, I really do agree with it. Like, there's some things about his analysis that I really do agree with, but it's this consistent trend of just like, whatever he feels is right, as opposed to genuinely looking at all these different sources.
In Russia, and it's like, it's hell. And the Nazis came along and said, well, not only are we going to restore order and greatness, but we're going to bloody well tell you whose fault this is. Yeah. It's like...
The Nazis didn't get popular because they came in telling people they were going to restore order and greatness. Hitler destroys the doesn't really destroy, but he eliminates the anti-fascist movement in Germany by ending unemployment for white people, right? And all those great things he was talking, beautifying, I mean, it's funny because he's like beautifying these factories, but Jorden Peterson isn't talking about how some of these factories were stolen from Jews in Hitler's time, you know what I mean? Like, he's look at this, wow, Hitler's putting on a thing where he's beautifying factories. Where the Jewish perspective is, Hitler just fucking stole my shit. Jorden Peterson is so focused on these psychological things. I feel like he's failing to see this historical context and this rational, practical decisions being made. These Germans were just swept up into this. No, man, these Germans got paid. These white Germans got paid money. They got jobs. They got things. And then they were, in some ways, bought. You know what I mean? Sort of like how so much of Western white Europe was bought with the wealth stolen from their the royalty went to Africa, stole all of that shit, and then paid off their citizens. You know what I mean? It's But Jordan Peterson loves this. He loves symbolism, it seems, and so did Hitler. But I'm not saying Jordan Peterson. No, I don't do that. But just that might be why Jordan Peterson is so fascinated in Hitler. Is their shared love for symbolism.
And Hitler, I've studied him a lot, trying to understand what happened. And Hitler soon called him the mouthpiece of the collective unconscious of the German people. So you imagine there's all this resentment and hatred brewing underneath the surface, and all this chaos is there, and the desire for order is like clamoring in everyone's minds. And Hitler comes along, and he's a very powerful emotional orator, and he's watching the crowd.
That's definitely true. My great-granddad went to see Hitler speak live because he heard about it in 1932. He heard about this guy making waves in politics, and that was what convinced him to get his visa. See, Jordan Peterson, it's wild, you know. Germany's like, whoa, this guy's awesome, and then the Jew is like, hey, get the fuck out of here, you know. It's just the difference of perspective, man.
And he listens, and when he says thing A, nothing happens.
He listens to
when he says thing B, everybody roars. And so he takes note of that. And it's not even conscious exactly, right? Because he's being molded by the crowd. And so they roar. And so we think...
How would you know that, Jordan Peterson? How would you know what is Hitler's consciousness and what is it?
So that's a reinforcement. That's a reward. And so then he goes down that line a little bit farther, and they roar some more. He tries something else, and it's silent.
It becomes like, what they want.
You bet. Exactly that, man. He acts out the dark desire of the mob. So he becomes the embodiment.
Now, see, I love this part. This is when I stopped being triggered when I first watched it, and when I started to be like, okay, because Jordan Peterson doesn't specifically mention it, but what he's bringing up is how everyday people were complicit in the extermination of Jewish people. I mean, Hitler is playing off of the masses. This is a fascinating point when we're examining this history. I mean, people all the time try and put all of the destruction of the Jewish people on Hitler, but that's easy because he died. You know what I mean? It's so easy to blame the guy who just died, you know? The reality of the situation is that those masses of people who loved what he was saying, was telling them, no, keep talking about how you hate Jews. Like, how do you hold all those people accountable? Because they just went back to life. They raised kids. And it's also interesting that after World War II, they didn't even talk about the Holocaust in Germany until the 60s, because Israel captures an ex-Nazi, this guy Eichmann, brings him to Israel and convicts him of war crimes. And the thing about Eichmann was he was an administrator, essentially. Hannah Arendt has a really good book. She's a famous Jewish writer. She was also like, don't think of me as Jewish first, but man, they were dealing with some stuff. But Hannah Arendt has this great book called Eichmann in Israel, where she breaks down how evil she really thinks Eichmann is as an administrator. But truth be told, I mean, you got all these people playing these background roles who are supporting this movement, and yet everyone focuses on Hitler. And I like this because this is the one time where I don't think he's really doing it intentionally, but he's, for me, forcing that question. And I hope that you hear that question, and I hope that you want to hear the answer, but I can tell you Jordan Peterson ain't got it.
Embodiment of the dark desire of the mob. And that's partly why he had the charisma. It's right, because there's this unconscious fantasy brewing in the back of everyone's minds. You see that
Why does he keep deciding what is unconscious and conscious? That's crazy. Could you imagine looking at someone and then being like, I'm going to decide for this person everything they're doing that's conscious and unconscious? I don't know. Doesn't that just sound like projection? I mean, how could you're psychoanalyzing someone else's mind. What do you do? There's a fantasy brewing in the back of everyone's mind. Did you know that in 1918, the largest genocide prior to the Holocaust of Jewish people happened in Ukraine? I mean, the fantasy brewing, to some extent, the fantasy is already, like, it's not a fantasy, it's just reality. Murdering, persecuting Jewish people has always been there. Mass murdering, just genocide, it's always been there.
Some degree now with Antifa, for example, and their proclivity towards violence, and you ask, just exactly what's going on there? Well, Hitler came to embody the desire of the German people for order and revenge.
Once again, revenge against what? I mean, the only reparations that Germany paid, I believe, was 12 billion or so. I don't know what the equivalent is, but I'm also pretty sure that almost all the money they paid in reparations was on a loan from banks in America, and then they defaulted on those loans during the Depression. What I'm trying to say is, if you want revenge, go after the people who really lead your government. The German people, as a collective, need to hold themselves accountable for the fact that for thousands of years, you guys have developed and supported a system that is doing these things. It's not Jews, man. A lot of the time, it's just yourself. Hey. Listen, before I go on, I'm trying to challenge the emotion. I still have some emotionality around this stuff. But I really just want you guys to understand that a big part of what Jorden Peterson is talking about is just the white perspective. So let's continue.
And he embodied that fully. You know, and you could say, so what happened was a collaboration between him and the people. It wasn't Hitler turned everyone into Nazis. It's like, no, that's not how it worked.
I'm sure there was a lot of good people still left over who got just overrun by the mania too.
Well,
that's kind of a myth. It's a little bit of a myth of good people overrun by the mania. I mean, what does that even mean? I mean, because the good people we know because they actually did something. This is more like people who were neutral in this conflict. But what is it? Archbishop Desmond Tutu, he said something along the lines of, you can't be neutral in these situations. If you're neutral, you're siding with the oppressor. You're siding with the persecutor. And that to me is, I mean, this is a big part of our post-Holocaust myth to legitimize some of these Nazis who went right back into their normal lives. But yeah, I mean, gotta move on from that.
We're disgusted by it.
Well, the other thing too is that, you know, people are not that brave. And everybody thinks, this is one of the things I teach in my Maps of Meaning class, you know, it's like, okay, you look at Nazi Germany in the 30s and you think, well, I'd be one of the heroes who rescued the Jews. It's like, statistically, that's very improbable.
Right.
And one of the things I've learned in the last year with all this strange political, what would you say, this strange situation that I've been in is how unlikely it is for people to speak up. They just won't. Even tenured professors who are tenured, they're protected. It's like the probability they'll pop their head up and say something that might make them identifiable.
For all the bullshit that Jorden Peterson's been talking about, I actually genuinely do wonder, I mean, I appreciate that he said everyone likes to think they'd be the ones who save the Jews, and then he didn't say, and I know I would have been one. And that honestly makes me feel a little bit more like he's trying, you know what I mean? You gotta give Jorden Peterson credit for being wrong. And then just try sparking conversation, sparking dialogue. Because truth be told, he's not running around shooting Jewish people, so it's not like he, you know, and he is contributing, or not just contributing, but keeping alive some of these myths that I've talked about throughout this. Gotta give credit to Jorden Peterson for talking about these things and for being wrong. And I honestly could imagine him taking in some Jews at this point, because it seems like he has a decent head on his shoulders. He's just lacking that historical context. But that decent head would make him a perfect person to risk helping Jews. And I honestly think he really is in it for the betterment of the human people.
Is very, very low. So
it's scary, yeah. I guess you're right.
Well, it's
and,
all...
and at time, and you know, in Nazi Germany, the stakes were as high as it could get. They didn't tolerate.
That's right.
dissension.
That's exactly right.
But
That's only kind of right. The stakes. So there's been a lot of research that's come out in the past 20 years where people are trying to not take their secrets to their grave. So there's a lot of people who are willing to open up about their experience living in the Holocaust, both Jews and non-Jews. And what they found is that the vast majority of the terror is directed at Jewish people. The vast majority of Germans are able to live almost completely normal lives during World War II until the war reaches them. But Hitler goes out of his way to make during his expansion, he goes out of his way. He lets life be harder for people on the border in those conflict zones, and then he saves resources for the actual German people. So it's hard to say how high the stakes were for Jewish people, which this guy right here, the guy hosting this is Jewish, I believe. He's because I saw another video by him a while ago. The stakes for him and his people are high, yeah, definitely. But are the stakes high for German people in general? Not really. The vast majority of resources for the Gestapo and for the internal police are being directed towards hunting and finding and attacking Jewish people. It really isn't being spent on terrorizing normal German people. But that's one of those myths that was developed after the war so that people could feel like they did everything that they could.
But even when the stakes are low, people won't speak up, eh?
All right. That was it. So, I bet if I met you in real life and we had a conversation about this reaction video, I would have said things differently. But truth be told, these are just my immediate feelings to watching it again. I hope you can at least listen and hear what I'm trying to say. Please let me know if you want to continue this dialogue. If you feel like I said something wrong, we can get into it. If you actually want to learn, don't contact me if you don't actually want to engage in learning with me. If you just want to teach me something. Actually, no, do teach me something. But don't contact me if you just got comments. Give me some questions too, you know what I mean? Like, let's actually engage in dialogue, because that's what actually matters. You can leave a comment just on the regular, but if you really want to reach out to me, give me a question, ask me, or tell me something. This was wrong. Why do you feel like you had the right to say it? Nathan, this was wrong. I hated it. Why do you feel like you could say it? Pose it at least like that so that we can really start some conversation, because that's what this is about. So, I appreciate this guy, this host, for helping this conversation happen. I appreciate Jorden Peterson for getting out there and being wrong and half right always, right? And I'll see you guys next time.